Hi, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the first session of Hindustan Times Leadership Summit after the keynote address by Environment Minister Mr. Prakash Javadekar. In the first session, we are discussing climate change and green economy, which is one of the biggest global issues. As you've seen, that 2020 tied with 2016 as the warmest year the human history has ever recorded. And we have seen in the first 20 years of this century, the most number of years have been the warmest ever recorded. And climate change has proven to be a big threat for all of us. Uh, but today we come with a welcome to the world of climate change with the United States, which is the biggest carbon emitter, deciding to rejoin the Paris Climate Agreement, the global agreement which aims to keep the temperature rise limited to 2 degrees Celsius from the pre-industrial levels. Uh, with this announcement, I expect that globally uh, there will be a lot of talk on climate change once again, almost after 4 years after the then US President Donald Trump announced withdrawing from the climate deal. But as well as climate change is a threat, it is also an opportunity for developing countries like India to move towards a greener economy which provides employment to a large number of young people who are looking for new avenues and reduce the dependence on fossil fuel. To discuss this important issue, we have two eminent guests with us, Mr. M. Rajeevan Nair, Secretary, Ministry of Earth Sciences, and Sunita Narain, Director General for Center for Science and Environment. Mr. Rajeevan has more than 30 years of experience in tropical meteorology. He has worked in IMD as well as Indian Institute of Tropical Meteorology. He has made a huge contribution in research on monsoon variability and development on monsoon prediction models and understanding extreme weather events like heavy rainfall, heat waves, cloud radiation interaction. He has been on many international expert panels, including that of WMO, WCRP, and apart from that, he has authored a large number of papers which have given a new insight on how the Indian weather system works. With him, we'll be talking much on climate science, which is an extremely important aspect of climate change. Sunita is one of the most eminent activist workers on the area of environment, not just climate change. For the last 40 years, she has worked endlessly on different issues of climate change. She is Director General of CSC and editor of Fortnightly magazine Down to Earth also. She was awarded Padma Shri uh, for her work in the area of development. Under her leadership, CSC won at the Center for the Stockholm Water Prize. Uh, 2005, she chaired the Tiger Task Force, which gave a large number of recommendations, which have led to India's tiger population rising to almost about 3,000 in 2018. But apart from that, she has worked on air pollution also, for water contamination. She was one of the key members of EPCA, which dealt with rising air pollution in Delhi NCR. Welcome, Sunita. Uh,
Thank you.
with this, my first question to Mr. Rajeevan would be that if you can help our listeners to understand that how the climate change has impacted the Indian weather system. If we know that 2020 is one of the warmest years the humans have seen. And if I recall, 2019 in the northern Indian Ocean, we had a maximum number of tropical cyclones uh, in last many decades. So, if you can help us to understand how the Indian weather system is vulnerable to climate change, it would be great.
Yeah, first of all, thank you. So, first of all, I will describe a little bit about what we have observed so far using our own data. We have about almost more than 100 years of data, especially on temperature, rainfall, etc. So if you really see the, as we know, as far as monsoon, rainfall is concerned, monsoon season is the main season where we get maximum rainfall. And if you take last 100, 120 years of monsoon rainfall data, we did not see any long-term trend. So monsoon is a very robust system. And so we should be thankful to God that we have a very robust system of monsoon. So mean monsoon rainfall has not changed. Of course, it has a multi-decadal variation and year-to-year variation. But what has changed in monsoon rainfall so far, I'm just talking about what we have observed so far, is monsoon rainfall is the intensity of heavier precipitation. And for example, rainfall more than 15 centimeter in a day, 24 hours, which can really cause a lot of flooding, and including flash floods. That frequency has increased, especially last 30, 40 years. Most of the places, especially over central plains as well as the Western Ghats, the frequency of heavy rainfall has increased. And number two is, in a particular season, you don't get rainfall in all the days. In all 122 days of June to September monsoon season, you don't get rain. You get rain only particular days, then followed by a kind of a dry spell, then followed by another good spell. So now what is happening is that the length of the dry spell is also increasing. And but even the total quantum of rainfall remains same, the intensity of rainfall is increasing, day-to-day increase, but the number of rainy days is decreasing, but the number of the dry spell is increasing. So there is a lot of changes in the daily rainfall activity in the monsoon season, which is beyond our doubt, which is statistically significant. So this should have serious impact on agriculture. Farmers should really learn how to cope up with this kind of changes in the daily precipitation pattern. As far as temperature is concerned, Indian temperature, Indian region is warming as equal to global warming. About 0.9 degree per last 100 years. India also has warmed up to that extent. So the warming of temperatures over India and global warming is beyond our doubt. Nobody should really question whether global warming is really happening or not, and whether India is also warming. So India is warming as equal to global warming, and so that can lead to. And warming is not only particular places, throughout India, all the regions and all the states are really getting warming. And the most important thing is, because of the warming, we get more frequent heat waves, and heat waves can really kill the people. And so the extremes of heat temperature is nothing but heat waves. And of course, this year is especially Delhi region we are expecting a lot of cold days, but the frequency of cold waves is really reducing it, mainly because we are shifting towards the right-hand side of temperature spectrum, and we'll be getting more heat waves than less cold waves. So these two are very, very certain. So rainfall pattern, daily rainfall patterns, and temperature increase and increase in heat wave. These are very, very certain. There's no doubt about it. The data really shows that. As far as tropical cyclones is concerned, the frequency may not be changing. The number of cyclones forming is not maybe changing it. It has some, again, multi-decadal variations and all year-to-year variation. But what is really happening now is, when a cyclone forms now as a low pressure system, there is a very high probability that this system will intensify into a very severe cyclonic storm. So the probability of intensification is very high. So if you are getting a low pressure system, we are very sure that it will going to be a very severe intensified severe cyclonic storm. And also the rate of intensification we call rapid intensification. The rapid intensification rate is going up. It is everywhere. The whole tropical global oceans, is all ocean basins, the Pacific, Atlantic basins. The rapid intensification is happening. That means once a storm forms, within few days, within maybe even 24 hours, within 48 hours, it intensifies into a very severe storm. So the rapid intensification is very important. And so when a cyclone comes and falls over a particular coast, we are very sure the damage occurring due to the cyclonic storm will be very severe, because we are not expecting a small storm, we are expecting a huge storm. So these are the three important factors which we have seen in the past, from past observations. And of course, the convective activity like thunderstorms, lightning also has increased a lot. And I'm not talking about air pollution, because air pollution could be a local problem. Of course, climate change can add more dimension to air pollution, and even though it's a local problem, but climate change, the whole global warming, or even the temperature changes, precipitation changes, can give another dimension to the air pollution. It can really exaggerate the air pollution issues. These are all some of the factors which I thought I will share. This is all absurd. So in future, of course, I may talk a little later probably.
I'll really ask you about that, because future is extremely important, and also the vulnerable parts of India. But at this point, I'll like to get to Sunita, because today President Biden decided to join. An executive order was signed to join the Paris Climate Agreement, which gives sort of a steam to the negotiations which will happen this year. By end of this year, the agreement will be finalized, and it will come into action from I think early next year. But like India has said that they are on a path to meet all their Paris commitments, and there's a lot of pressure from the developing world that India should enhance, and other countries should also enhance their commitments for 2030. So, what sort of play do you see into the climate negotiations with the US coming on board, and the new demands being made by the developing world without meeting its commitment of higher finance, technology transfer, and so many other things?
Chetan, I mean, firstly, I think the US joining and Biden's decision as the first decision that he's taken is welcome. The fact is, the US has never been very proactive in reducing its emissions. And you know this, we as commentators and researchers on climate change know that the US has always been a renegade state when it comes to taking action. But President Trump actually was a climate change denier. And today's US emissions are higher than even its 2016 emissions. So the US really has jeopardized the world. So Biden rejoining the Paris Agreement is very welcome. The US is no longer the world's top emitter, but it remains the world's largest historical emitter, and it plays a very influential role in being able to bring climate change back on the table. And action in the US is critical. So that said, I think there are three things that we need to consider for the future. One, the world clearly is not on track to meet even certainly not the 2-degree emission target that was set, 1.5 degrees in the Paris Agreement, as an aspirational target that we would try, the world would work towards making sure that the temperature rise would not exceed 1.5 degrees centigrade since the Industrial Revolution of the 1880, and temperature records are available. We are not on track on meeting that. We're not on track on meeting 2 degrees. We are close to meeting 3 to 4 degrees by the end of the decade. And that clearly is something which will be devastating. Dr. Rajeevan has already laid out so powerfully, so well, the impact in a country like India, which is hurting the most vulnerable, the poorest in our country. This is the same in Africa. And remember, the poor in the world have not contributed to the stock of greenhouse gas emissions. They're actually victims of the greenhouse gas emissions, climate change that is happening today. So as temperatures increase, the impact will increase. And not only the poor, but also the rich are going to be equally impacted. So we need action. Now, this is where the world has to start talking more clearly and more firmly in terms of how we go forward. You have raised some very important issues to say the pressure is already on countries like India on what we will do. But the fact is, the developed world is not at all meeting the commitments that it needs to meet, even under the Paris Agreement. And we all have to understand that the Paris Agreement is actually a cop-out. The Paris Agreement whitewashed, erased the issue of historical responsibility of countries. It agreed to a formula largely under the pressure of the United States and President Obama at that time to say that let's go in for an agreement in which all countries will say what they will do. So we do not have targets set for countries based on their contribution to the problem. We actually have an agreement that says that countries will say what can they do to reduce the emissions. And this is where the US has come up with a target, which is called INDC, or NDC, Nationally Determined Contribution. India has put out its NDC, and so have other countries. The aggregate sum of the NDCs means that the world is on a pathway for at least a 3-degree temperature increase. And a country like the United States, which has already got such a weak NDC, is not on track to meet even that by 2030. And President Biden, I think, is going to have a very tough job now, because even though coal has reduced in the US and shale gas is being used, and US energy emissions are down by 30%, US total emissions are going up because the cost of energy is so cheap. The one other big step that President Biden has taken is to cancel the Keystone pipeline. This is very, very important. But fracking of shale gas will continue. The cost of energy is very low in the US. So there are big challenges of how the developed world will reduce its emissions. Now, this is where the pressure will come on countries like India. There is no doubt India is on track to meet its Paris commitment or target, but these are very small targets. And rightly so, because we don't have the burden of taking on very deep emission reductions today. But there is no doubt in my mind that the pressure will grow on us. There is also the fact that we have opportunities today to do much better in terms of emission reductions, which will be good for us. So we need to look at emission reductions from the point of view of co-benefits. We need to put that agenda out to the world to say, we are willing to do more. We will go that extra step. But what are you doing? And I think we need to be climate change champions today, not just for the poor in the world, but for the future of humanity.
Thanks, Sunita. It's, from here, Mr. Rajeevan, the minister also said earlier in the earlier session that people in India, in South Asia, in the poor countries are bearing the burden of emission by the rich countries. Historically, how they have emitted, they have contributed more to climate change than we have done, or the entire developing world has contributed. But he also focused that disaster management is a key aspect. So I would like, Mr. Rajeevan, that if you can throw light that how the climate-induced disasters in India have increased, the intensity has increased, how the suffering of the people have also increased because of the climate change. Within some we can know that how vulnerable we are to climate change as compared to the rest of the world.
That's a good point that the Honorable Minister has told, that as far as climate change is concerned, we should not say that it's your job, it's not my concern. So we are all responsible for limiting the emission of greenhouse gases. Because especially carbon dioxide, if you say that it's a uniformly mixed gas. So what we are experiencing, temperature change, temperature warming, is not mainly because of our emission. It is maybe the emissions from global developed countries. So we should not assume that it is our emission which is more worrisome. So it is all countries should take responsibility, especially developed countries should take more responsibility. That's number one. Number two is what he has told about the South Asian region is very, very correct. That ultimately the poor countries are going to suffer more, mainly because they are more vulnerable, because they are poor, and so they may not have enough infrastructure to cope up or mitigate for enough climate change mitigation, etc. And as far as South Asia region is concerned, we are all vulnerable for many disasters. It is happening every year. If you really see the climate change, the disasters which we see, very natural disasters, then the frequency is increasing, not only in India, even neighboring countries like Bangladesh, even Bhutan, even neighboring countries. All countries are experiencing every year increasing frequency of heavy rainfall, tropical, very intensive, very high intensity tropical cyclone, the frequency of droughts. So droughts, what happen means the number is also increasing, the number of drought events is increasing, and also the area affected by the droughts also is increasing. Earlier, maybe 15-20% in a particular year is we used to get drought. This is a very typical number, about 20%. But that number is, every year is increasing. Instead of 28%, now we are getting 25, 30. So the area affected by drought also is increasing. That means more people are suffering. And this is very common for all the South Asian countries. So as far as climate change vulnerability is concerned, Africa, South Asia, these are the regions where you get maximum. And also the impact of climate change due to our health. There is a very important cartoons which WHO has produced, and they have shown that how countries are emitting greenhouse gases. But as far as impact is concerned, the poor countries in Africa and South Asia will suffer more as far as health is concerned. And so the climate change will have impact on agriculture, in terms of crop yield. So cropping patterns may change. Health means very, very unfortunate incidents of sickness and illness can happen, especially vector-borne diseases, etc. And water, there could be a lot of water stress because the global warming will reduce the water resources, and especially in terms of evaporation and less rainfall activity, etc. And also the energy. So we'll have more and more energy demand for countries like India. And so these are all some of the impacts which we can expect, especially for South Asia. So we should be fully prepared for doing that. So what we need to really do is a kind of a climate change impact assessment. That is more important for all South Asian countries. We know very well from our climate change, we have good science of climate change projections. Of course, there's a lot of uncertainties there in climate change projections. Everything, whatever we project is not Bible. It is, there could be uncertainty. But because of uncertainty, we should not hesitate to take action. We should start taking action, and we are already taking. India government is very much committed. For example, renewable energy, etc. They are going very high, and we should appreciate that. And but so we should also take impact assessment reports. We should prepare, and especially for different sectors like agriculture, water. What could be, for example, impact on 2030, 40? Don't talk about 2090, 2009, where we don't know whether we will be. We will not be available to see what is happening. But at least for next 20 years, 30 years, what will be the impact on climate change and agriculture, for example? What will be the impact on water? What will be the impact on health? What will be the impact on energy? And we can start developing policies and also the technology development for mitigation. This is more important. For example, climate resilient agriculture crop, we need to really develop. And water resources, we should have a strategy, how to store, and future climate change is really happening. So these are some of the important activities we should really start doing it. That's what my comment. Thank you.
Yes, Sunita, Mr. Rajeevan made an extremely important point on climate change impact assessment. I think needed for the country in South Asia, and the minister earlier spoke about the carbon space, that we need to reserve the climate space for developing country. And there's a talk of carbon neutral, carbon zero economies. They have to give a deadline for that. So, as we proceed towards the negotiation table, the new demands are coming up from the developed world, which sadly, in the last so many years, have not been able to meet what they have already committed. In Copenhagen, they said 100 billion per year by 2020. If you see the aggregate, so far they have provided only 40 billion total. Whether they should have at least 500 billion they should have provided. And the technology transfer was also negligible or very poor. Very less has been done in the technology transfer network, which was set after, I think, the Paris Agreement or just before the Paris Agreement. So my question to you is that, this entire conversation on climate change, sometimes I feel gets dominated by the voices from the West. And the voices of the developing world and us gets unheard. We are the most vulnerable. We are the worst hit. We are the poorest. But we are not getting the benefit. We are not being protected.
Well, Chetan, you've put it so well. I mean, you and I have been there in many conference of parties together. And we have seen how the Western media actually manipulates the whole narrative. I remember writing many times from the conference of parties saying, I almost believe we are living in two different planets where, our reality is not at all being reflected. But that's the inequality, both in terms of climate change, but also in terms of the power of the global media, which is really defending the right of its own countries. I mean, I have seen how the best of Western media actually discounts and disregards the voices that come out of the South when it comes to climate change. I mean, I can give you my own instance that I will be interviewed on practically everything by Western media, but not on climate change. Because when it comes to climate change, and I raise some very inconvenient issues in terms of their emissions, their responsibilities, and the need to talk as equals, this is not acceptable, because at some level they would like to build a narrative in which we are the problems, that a country like India is today the biggest problem. I mean, China has learned to play the narrative very well. I mean, China has put out its net zero goal for 2060. Now, the net zero goals actually have no flesh on them. We have no idea how countries are going to meet the net zero goal. We don't even know how they're going to meet the 2030 goals, which have been set under the Paris Agreement. And so it's all about actually creating a narrative which creates villains, which are more in the developing world, in this case India. And I think it's very important, Chetan, from what you have said, it's so important for us, and I'm glad we are having this conversation, so important for us to put out our point of view, to put out very clearly our point of view. But this is where we also need to have a lot more data, a lot more ability to be able to say these things, not just at the media, not just at the level of public, but also in scientific panels. I mean, the weakness of the IPCC is that it's very Western dominated, and it does not reflect the hard issues of the carbon budget, for instance. I mean, let me tell you, when CSE put out its report in the early 90s, as you will remember, Global Warming in an Unequal World, a case of environmental colonialism, it really shocked the world, because we raised some very, very tough issues and raised them against the large Western organizations like the World Resources Institute to say that you are completely wrong in saying that countries like India are the problem. Actually, you are the problem. And today, the question today is that how will we divide up the carbon space? I mean, if you look at the hard fact of it, by 2030, the carbon space will be exhausted when you come to a temperature rise of 1.5 degrees. I mean, we know that every time we talk about temperature rise, there is a finite amount of carbon space that exists. And the Western world has already colonized that entire carbon space. And now China has joined the league. But countries like India, the entire continent of Africa, does not have any space. Does that mean that we are going to disappear from the planet Earth? Does that mean that we will stop breathing? Does that mean that we should not get development rights on how we proceed? I think it's very important that this discussion is central, and our government needs to take these things up with greater force. We need to stop just focusing on money and technology. I mean, that's a gripe that we always have. We'll never get it. But the fact is, we need to put the facts on the table to say we need our right to development. And for that, we need a transformational market system in which we will get the funds, we will get the technology, because we are not willing to be only victims. We are also the solution in terms of meeting the climate change targets.
Mr. Rajeevan, very important point Sunita has also raised is about the climate science, the impact of climate change on India, and how we can tell the world that how much impact we are facing in day-to-day life. People who are living in the coastal areas, they're seeing so many cyclones like Tamil Nadu late last year, back-to-back 2 cyclones for their the life in the entire state was hit. And also the type of work we have done for disaster management. If you see Odisha, it is one of the finest examples to how to fight climate change, cyclones. I remember in the last year's cyclone, only about 10 or 15 people died in Odisha, severe cyclone. In West Bengal also, and Amphan, that figure was slightly higher, but still it was extremely well managed. And how we are trying to build a system to cope with climate-induced natural disasters. And so please tell us how India is trying to fight without any assistance from the developed world, the climate change, and also what is your prediction for the future based on science and impacts of climate change?
Yeah, first I will talk about future climate change. We have recently brought out a climate change national climate change assessment report by our institute. We have a center called Center for Climate Change Research in Pune, IIT in Pune. They have a very strong research group, about 30-40 research scientists are working. So we have recently brought that book is available free of cost on online. Anybody can download it and read it. So the future climate change projection very clearly say that the so far observed the warming will still continue. And if you, of course, when you talk about future climate change, we should we don't know how the greenhouse gases are going to change. So we find out some scenarios that is prescribed by IPCC, and for some 2.5, 4.5, 8.5. 8.5 is too extreme, but 4.5 is reasonable. So if you really go with 4.5 scenario, and we are expecting about 2-degree warming by 2099 or so, 2090 or so. So the warming, whatever we are experiencing so far, will still keep continuing even if you take some action. Because we should really understand that greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide has a lifetime of 50-60 years. And so for some, that's the question we are asking. Last year, 2020 was one of the warmest year globally. And people asked the question, it was a La Nina year. La Nina year, we are not supposed to get this kind of warming. And also the last year, because of COVID, everything was stopped. Many industrial activities stopped, and also the transport sector was down. But still, how we got it? Because the carbon dioxide emission was less, so that is true. But whatever the emission which happened in few years back, it is still continuing. It's a lifetime of 50-60 years, carbon dioxide especially. And so we should understand this kind of dynamics of greenhouse gases to understand how the future climate change will happen. And as far as monsoon is concerned, as I said, that monsoon is going to be very robust. But whatever we observed, the extreme weather, extreme rainfall pattern, intense rainfall pattern will continue. So we may be expecting more and more flood events, especially flash flood events, and especially cities like Bombay, Chennai can experience this kind of urban flooding. That is one. And tropical cyclones, as I said, that the intensity of tropical cyclones will increase. And drought, the area of droughts will increase, and heat wave, the frequency as well as the intensity, and more importantly, duration of heat waves. Normally, what we observe is the heat wave starts, it persists about 3 days, 4 days, but nowadays, in the future, we should expect it may even last more than 1 week, which can really damage the system, and it can really kill people. And these are the projections. So whatever we observed, we are going to see in future also, with a much more accelerated way, much more speedier way. So this is the projections which go, and of course we have some little uncertainty, and uncertainty also we can quantify. The report, National Climate Change Report, we have really given the uncertainties in the climate change projections. So now we should expect this extreme weather events to go up. So what we should really do? So as you correctly said, the last 15-20 years, our disaster management system has improved substantially. And so when you really want to have a very reliable disaster management system, one is, first of all, the forecast should improve with the weather warnings. And for that, Ministry of Science is putting a lot of efforts. IMD is doing extremely good job, especially as you know that tropical cyclone forecasts are extremely good, our forecast. And we are emphasizing on improving our weather forecast. We are going to have improved observation network. We are going to have a better modeling strategy, weather prediction modeling strategy, and including availability of satellites, etc. We are requesting ISRO to put more satellites. So, and also we have to train our own people. So all these efforts, Ministry of Science is doing it. And a typical weather prediction like tomorrow it will rain or not, that kind of predictions may not really help us, especially when you tackle natural disasters. So we need a different strategy. One is, for example, we may not be able to predict exactly when it will happen, what will be the intensity, but we can always talk about probability. So, for example, after 3 days, there could be a probability of very heavy rainfall, which can lead to floods. That is a good forecast. So immediately people can really start taking action, and also they can save people, and also the disaster management system. Everywhere it is changed. NDMA, for example, doing excellent job. You correctly told about Orissa. In 99 cyclone, 10,000 people died. They learned the lesson. Orissa has learned the lesson, and they improved substantially the disaster management system. If a cyclone goes, they are fully prepared. Their SOPs are very clear. They are very alert. And many states governments are now coming up with a very improved disaster management system. They understood the importance of developing very capable disaster management system. And Ministry of Science is really helping them by providing accurate forecasts. Of course, sometimes our forecasts go bad, but our forecasting capability and ability and the success rate, everything is improving. That's a good sign. And so we should have a very resilient and very strong disaster management system, which all people are working together now. That's a good sign which is happening here in India.
Yeah, Sunita, we are also running out of time. This is extremely interesting conversation because on one side, we are talking about the science of climate change. On the other side, what is the response from the negotiators? So your closing remarks for this year, because negotiations will happen maybe in the later part. So what are your key elements for the negotiators, and what you would like to see by when the climate negotiation, the Paris Agreement for this year, for the first 10 years, and by end of 2021?
Yeah. Two things, Chetan. I want to first just re-emphasize what Dr. Rajeevan has said. I mean, the fact is, this is why countries like India must understand and must adapt to climate change. I mean, we have a double whammy. I mean, on one hand, we are mismanaging our water resources, and on the other hand, we will get more, as he very clearly said, more extreme rain events. We only get rain today for 100 days in a year, and now those days are going to go down, which means more floods, more droughts, which means management of our land and water resources, which is good for us, which is where the entire development agenda for India really is something that is our national imperative. I mean, building resilience of poor communities, investing in land and water is something that is good for us, for our economy, for poor communities, and good risk management for climate change. Now, as far as the global agreements are concerned, and Glasgow is where the COP is expected to happen by the end of the year. With the US joining, there is going to be energy back to discuss climate change negotiations. I think for countries like India, three top agendas are on the table. One, the world is today talking about how we can involve markets for reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, which is really going back to the whole discussion of CDM, Clean Development Mechanism. But what India needs to put on the table is we want transformational markets. We want a market mechanism which pays us the true cost of carbon dioxide reduction, which means that we do not want any cheap, convoluted, market-based mechanism which takes away our cheapest options. We want the world to move to reduction. So that's the first big agenda that is on the table. The second agenda that will be on the table is the role within markets of land-based sinks. Now, sinks are those like forests which absorb carbon dioxide. And there is a huge debate about how accurate is the estimation of the role of sinks in the reduction of carbon dioxide. India needs to put this on the table because the fact is, our forests are habitats of our very poor people. And we cannot look at forests as only carbon sinks. So what is the world going to do? And what is the value of those forests? Again, something good for us, because if we can come up with the right formula, invest in the livelihoods of forest-based communities, build our forest resources, it will be good for us. But we need to put that on the table. We need to put the issue of vulnerability of poor communities on the table. The adaptation fund, the net, the loss and damage negotiations are completely full of words, no action, and no recognition of the pain of the poor people in the world. That needs to be put on the table. And lastly, the issue of global stocktake will be up in 2023. We know that the world will have to move towards much tougher emission reduction, that today's targets set under Paris Agreement amount to nothing. But we must drive the issue of equity in the target setting. We must insist that countries have to take reductions based on the contribution to the problem. And we must ask for burden sharing in the target setting when it comes to Paris Plus, when it comes to talking about what we will do to reduce emissions so that we can stay within the safety threshold. And 1.5 degrees is not going to be possible, but at least 2 degrees. And I think that's really what we need to talk about and put some very hard negotiation points on the table. This is a make or break time, Chetan. This is going to be a very tough year for India and its diplomats.
Thank you, Sunita. Mr. Rajeevan, from you, closing remarks on the science of climate change. How would you like to see the progress, the collaboration of Indian scientists with the global scientists on the science of climate change? And your closing remarks, please.
Yeah, so actually, as I said, that future climate change has some uncertainties. The people who don't believe in global warming, they always talk about your future climate change has a lot of uncertainties we are not supposed to believe. But uncertainties are there. But we are trying to reduce their uncertainties. So as far as climate scientists are concerned, our agenda should be, which is that to reduce the uncertainties. For that, to improve the climate models and improve the strategy in which we try to project the future climate change. And as far as Indian climate scientists are concerned, we have very good collaboration with the scientists abroad. And I would like to announce that we have first time for the last many years, first time we have developed the Indian climate model. It's called Indian Earth System Science Model, Earth System Model, and which we are from which we are started making the projections for the future climate change. And for the first time, the next IPCC report, which is going to come in 2022 or so, our climate change projections will be included. That's the first time. So far, India's contribution was not there in the IPCC report. So, and that climate system model will be further improving it, and it's the first version of the model. We'll be improving it. We have been collaborating with the foreign scientists, which we will continue to do that. So, ultimate aim is to improve the climate change system model and to reduce the climate change projections in the coming years. That's our agenda. Thank you.
It was really very informative talking to Mr. Rajeevan and Sunita. There were a lot of insight from Mr. Rajeevan on climate science, how India is vulnerable, what the government is doing. The new climate model is extremely interesting. And also the new report, the climate assessment report, or the projection report, which the ministry has come out with ITM, is very interesting because it tells us that how the future would be tough, how the weather will change, or how the weather will impact life of everyone from cities to villages, to people living in the coast and forest. So what sort of impact it will have. And Sunita, you gave really insight on how the global negotiations are moving, how the rich countries are putting a pressure on the zero balance, financing of the commitments, NDCs, and under the Paris Agreement. We were short of time, but it could have gone for a longer period. See you again. Thanks a lot, both of you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.